Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss the 2021 version of Nightmare Alley, starring Bradley Cooper, Kate Blanchett, Toni Collette, Willem Dafoe, Richard Jenkins, Rooney Mara, Ron Perlman, Mary Steenburgen, and David Strathairn, and directed by Guillermo del Toro. And why did I say the 2021 version? It's because there was an original movie from 1947 that Guillermo del Toro doesn't want it to be a remake of, but really it's based on the book. And by the way, I forgot to bring this up. Welcome back to Guillermo del Toro after The Shape of Water. And when I reviewed that, I was moved back leading up to that one way back when. So before I get into this review, I must say I watched a few of his movies quite a few times, like Hellboy and Shape of Water. I Those are the films I would go back to. Oh, and Kronos I watched once. Same with Devil's Backbone. I really enjoy those movies, to be fair, but there's some that are better than others, I will admit. But let's see how this one goes. Let's get into it. It's 1939, and Stanton Carlyle, or Stan for short, played by Bradley Cooper, drags a dead body and burns it down the house of the dead body, leaves it, and goes on a bus where it ends on a traveling carnival where he works as a carny, after seeing a disturbing man with a troubled past called a geek biting a chicken's head off, and I thought, what the fuck is this? As it's totally disturbing, all thanks to Clem Holtley, played by Willem Dafoe. And this scene is disturbing, and this opening felt strange. And the movie is beautiful to look at, as this or Dune should win Best Cinematography for how pretty this movie looks. Maybe Dune more than this one, in my opinion, but they go 20 miles to another place where they have another carnival as he sees Molly Cahill, played by Rooney Mara, and goes after the geek. And while he goes missing, as he finds him, the geek pushes Stan, and Stan beats up on the geek when Clem comes in and puts him back in his cage. And this carnival seems fucked up, and with some pleasant things coming later in the film, as we'll focus on the carnival for an hour. And this is what the trailer told me, as it takes place in the circus. As an hour later, it'll turn into a film noir, as it is a twist I kind of like. But my problem with this first 30 minutes to an hour is, what is the point until we move on to an hour later? But let's focus slowly on the first 30 minutes. Stan and asks Xena, the seer, played by Toni Collette, to use her bathtub, and as he goes in the tub, he meets Pete, played by David Strathairn, who's an alcoholic, and I say that because he drinks a shit ton of alcohol. And this is so far kind of dark, as that's Guillermo del Toro's style, sure, of the movie. And he's copying the book, not the original 1947 movie, I must add, like I said earlier. Stan has a crush on Molly, and her guardian Bruno, played by Ron Perlman, doesn't like the fact Stan has the butterflies for Molly. And the performances are good, but the scenes at the carnival does unfortunately kind of drag, as this is a long movie at 2.5 hours, which is not Guillermo del Toro's style to a movie that long, as I've never seen one that's this long. Name one movie that Guillermo del Toro made that was as long as this. I'm waiting. Stan sees what Pete can do as a magic trick, as he guesses where a watch Stan is wearing came from, as Stan wishes to take the profession, as Stan wishes to teach him that magic trick from Pete later on. And I'm thinking, is Stan a good person or a bad person? Which is still a questionable to me, as until we get a little past an hour into the movie, which is a real problem for half of this movie. Stan helps Clem put his creatures in a particular spot, as we see a Neek, which looks like a baby Cyclops. And next scene, Stan delivers a box of alcohol to Pete, and that's when Stan asks Pete to learn his magic trick I brought up a few minutes ago. As he begins to learn the trick and sees Molly show where electricity comes out of her hands, as Stan has an idea of putting her in an electric chair, as it'll execute her and have her come back to life, and their chemistry is fine at best. It's not the greatest. Stan builds the electric chair, and Bruno and his sidekick Major notice how much he's fancies her, and threatens if he hurts her, he'll punch him in the face, which will theoretically happen later in the movie. And at nighttime, Stan sees Molly had a dream and wakes up and sits on the ride with the horses that are plastic and start dancing with Stan and as he kisses her. And they don't have the chemistry of Sally Hawkins and the amphibian man from The Shape of Water, in my opinion. The geek is dying, and Stan and Clem drop him off at the hospital and leave him there and have a bite at a diner. And the dialogue is written good, but honestly, not great. But I do like seeing Willem Dafoe as a creepy presence. And the dialogue being said by him makes him the best character, in my opinion, as he's perfectly cast in a Guillermo del Toro film. Pete sleeps under the stage with his pet rabbit George, and he asks Stan for more alcohol and grabs it for him. Stan grabs something that might poison or kill him, as I get the impression he did it on purpose to get the book of magic tricks and will be misused, and that tells me that he's not a good person for the rest of the movie. Bruno and Major tell Xena Pete is lying dead on the ground, which is a melodramatic scene, as this could have been a cut out of the movie, in my opinion. Nighttime again comes, and the cops show up to shut down the carnival until Stan saves the day by showing an electric show and shows Pete magic tricks to a police officer, or Pete's magic tricks, to a police officer where he can tell them where the officer is, or who the and why he's the way he is, as he explains what his mother believes he's supposed to be, and they celebrate, which is honestly very oddly acted. And this is another scene that could be cut out of the movie. They celebrate Stan, and Stan finds Molly as she says she's ready to leave the carnival with Stan, and Major notices Molly is somewhere as Bruno and he comes in and beats up on Stan like he said earlier in the film he would, and she tells him she's leaving with him, and they take off the next day. And this is the only scene that is well acted, in my opinion, as it is very well made, and the score is not one of my favorites from Alexandre Desplat. 2 years later, Stan and Molly work together on the magic trick profession Stan is working on, and they live together as a couple. In one of the shows they perform together, he meets a psychiatrist, Dr. Lilith Ritter, played by Cate Blanchett, who comes off as the antagonist like Stan is for this entire movie, as she comes off kind of like a bitch, as she asks him what's in his purse, or her purse, and he does bring up as she has a small pistol, and this scene does come off as antagonizing, and the cinematography for the second half is much more beautiful than the first half, as Stan faints while doing his trick on an elderly gentleman, and Molly believes he's on to Dr. Ritter, and he's been asked to see him with Dr. Ritter and takes an appointment with the elderly man whose name is Charles. And it is becoming a film noir, as Cate Blanchett is the femme fatale character I learned about in college, while Stan goes to Ritter's office and wants to chat with her, as it feels like he's in love with the femme fatale, as he learns more about her, and he regrets ever seeing her with Charles. And Cate Blanchett's performance is fine, in my opinion. Willem Dafoe's character is the best character, and he's only in the first half of the movie, as this movie is pretty damn slowly paced. Molly calls Bruno as she misses him. Xena and the Major, while Stan goes through a session with Dr. Ritter while at her office, and she begs him to sit as he does after sitting at first, but eventually he lies down and she manipulates Stan. As I'm getting bored at some of this, could be cut out of the movie, in my opinion, and the movie needs at least 30 minutes in the editing room. And this scene and the scenes I brought up, some of the scenes in the doctor's office could be cut out. And same goes with Bruno, Xena, and the Major's visitation should again go in the editing room, as I'm getting bored out of my mind, and I felt the pacing right out the bat. Stan finds out the hand command is coming towards him with a card, and the next scene he sees Mrs. Kimball, played by Mary Steenburgen, who had a son who died and misses her son to death. And what was the point of this scene? And again, Editing room floor. Stan gives money to Dr. Ritter to put on the safe and tells her to go to a friend of hers who happens to be Ezra Grindle, played by Richard Jenkins, which was a Step Brothers reunion between the two actors despite they don't have scenes together. And by them, I'm talking about Richard Jenkins and the Mary Steenburgen. But let's move on. But Ezra is more in the movie than Mrs. Kimball. Stan visits Ezra as he takes a lie detector test, and he sees Ezra's dead wife while in the middle of the test, which is an odd time to bring up his wife to begin with, as he's proving he's a fraud. Stan goes back to Dr. Ritter and tries to frame her as he washes her hands, and I think this movie is getting more and more odd. But don't get me wrong, it is well made, but the movie starts to lose me as I'm an hour and 42 minutes into the movie, and I feel it dragging quite a bit. Stan continues to visit with Ezra as he makes an appointment with him to see his dead wife, who happens to be named Dory, and says yes, which is something he's really going to regret. And Stan starts drinking alcohol, and that is not a great move. That is not a great move by all means. Nor is this a great movie by all means, as this is nominated for Academy Awards, and I would say it would run up for cinematography between this or Dune, but I still think Dune would win in my opinion. That's just my guess, but Stan demands Molly to dress up as Ezra's dead wife, while at a random scene, Charles and Mrs. Kimball shoot each other off to see their son Julian, which should be in the editing room floor. While Stan gets back to the house and Molly leaves him with a letter as she goes to the bus, and Stan follows her to the men's bathroom, which is a painfully acted scene, as it's painful to watch. Half of this movie is fucking painful to watch at times, I watched this movie 4 times, and I'm thinking to myself, I don't get what the appeal of this movie is or what people like about it, as it doesn't know what it wants to be about. Stan takes Molly to Ezra while he doesn't have the security guards outside with him, and if it were me, I wouldn't trust the motherfucker at this point, as Molly is pretending to be his dead wife, and as Ezra sees she's not Dory and she knows Stan is a fraud, or he knows Stan's now that is a fraud, and Stan beats the living shit out of him, and he kills him, and security comes outside as they hear about the Kimball's death, and shoots at them, but misses. And why are these security guards so fucking stupid is beyond me. They officially get away from the guards as they run over the guard Anderson's ass, and as they get all away from them, Molly officially leaves Stan and collects his money from Dr. Ritter, and she says to Stan she does love him, and we suddenly see she stole his money, and she shoots Stan in the ear as he chokes the life out of her briefly, and more security guards go after Stan as he's bleeding to death, and gets away on the train and arrives at another carnival as a boozed man, where another carny boss, who's played by Tim Blake Nelson, tries to get rid of him, and as Stan begs for a job while smelling like booze and cries at first, and the boss gives him a job as a geek, as this particular carnival is, and he laughs randomly, and I thought, what the fuck kind of ending is that? As the climax is very strange, as it left a sour taste in my mouth. Now it's time for the rating. I'll give this movie a 4.0 out of 10. This movie is very well made, but my problem is, who is this Stanton Carlisle? And what the fuck was the point of this movie? But the fact it's a film noir is fine, and the performances were fine, as the movie kind of soured in my mouth at the end of the day. The cinematography is beautiful to look at, but I don't like Stan enough to follow him around in this whole movie, as it was very rough to watch at times. It's a shame I'm giving this movie a non-recommendation, as it's 30 minutes too long, or maybe a little more, as it could have been in the editing room as I watched this 4 times, and I personally don't get the appeal as it has, as other than the film noir is resurrected by the end of the, but at the end of the day, I didn't really like the movie, and I tried all 4 times to like this movie, but unfortunately, I can't. This is a serious disappointment from Guillermo del Toro. I'm truly sorry. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me or rejoining me for Guillermo del Toro. And until whenever we get to the Oscars, or when he gets to the next movie, and the Oscar goes to